Hello, everybody. We can now continue the second session of this seminar organized here at the University of Lapland in Finland. I'm Dino Girardi from the University of Lapland. I'm reading here my PhD, but I'm also a fellow researcher at the University of Bologna with Monica Palmirani, that she will be one of the speakers of this session. The first speaker is Sander Münster from the University of Jena. Then we have Monica Palmirani from the University of Bologna, and then the last one is Rosa Ballardini from the University of Lapland. So I really ask you to be strict in your timetable, because you have 20 minutes, and please keep the 20 minutes. But I will tell you when your time is finishing. So we can start with Sander Münster, a current state of 3D modeling for humanities research and education. Sander, the floor is yours, please.
Yeah, many thanks for your introduction, Dino. And so it's my great pleasure to present a little bit about my research and also working topic here, 3D modeling in humanities. So before continuing, just to double check with you, I hope you can hear me well.
Yes, we can hear you very well.
Right. Thank you very much. So maybe briefly about my research group. So we are located in Germany, in Jena, not Vienna, which is, I would say, 150 kilometers southern of Berlin. And in my group, we have currently 20 members, and we are dealing with 3D, 4D images, digital heritage, humanities, but also, I would say, several perspectives ranging from humanities to social science, but also to computing. And as you may have seen, of course, 3D and 4D technologies are a core topic here. And so let me start in the first part of my presentation with presenting about a current state of the art in 3D modeling for cultural heritage. And let's maybe start with this slide here. And this is that one of the big large-scale movements are to automatize 3D scanning. So the acquisition of geometrical, but also radiometrical proportions of specifically tangible heritage, for instance, via those camera domes, and always connected to the question how to make this in an efficient and a fast way possible. Our strands related to 3D modeling in humanities are also connecting to the question how to, I would say, making this process of creation cultural heritage, recreating the cultural heritage more efficient, more slim, more targetable, and the colleagues from Venice may know this very well. So for instance, it's about using parametric approaches for 3D modeling, which means to define a kind of rule set for describing historical houses, for instance, and so on, and therefore enhancing the efficiency of modeling and making this much more quicker possible. And now we are connecting a little bit to the question of copyrights. Also the point of user-generated 3D scans. So I was really curious to hear about the situation on NFTs. With 3D scans, there are also, I would say, some unclear and also, I would say, fuzzy issues related to that. And you may remember this case here, which was about a possible 3D scanning of the bust of the Nofretete in a museum in Berlin, which made large rumors in 2018. It turned out in the end that this was just a PR activity by a art collective rather than a real theft of this bust. But it raised the question, of course, who owns the 3D scan of a certain object, and of course who has opportunity to be the gatekeeper of enabling or disabling this scannings here. And since this was, I would say, very much controversially discussed in Germany at this time in other cases, so this is an example for also taken or acquired with a software which costs €2 to do this. And British Museum, for instance, was playing around with what if enabling users with visitors to digitizing their 3D assets proactively via their cameras and uploading these 3D models into a portal. So that's maybe the other side, the vice versa perspective on that topic. Let's maybe switch to another topic area. So 3D modeling is one branch. Another one is, of course, how to make these things visually available and perceptible. And of course, one big issue during the last years has been virtual tours. So Google, for instance, within the Arts and Culture program, digitized many museum interiors, for instance, the Rijksmuseum here, and make it available via their platforms. Other things of relevance are virtual reality, which means I would say, synthetic created virtual world. And there has been this project, WIM, which made an overview of what are approaches available in Europe. And I think it turned out that there is a 3 to 4 digit number of applications in museums in different settings dealing with heritage in that field. Another strand, augmented reality. And the difference between virtual and augmented reality is that augmented reality means the enhancement of a real world perception by digital means. So for instance, as you see from our example on the left side here, to project images on a real world situation and therefore propose additional information and so on. And finally, it's about the closer connection between, at the one hand, game engines, but also serious gaming at the other hand. So, which brings us at the one hand to the point where 3D technologies, for instance, for game makings, game environments, has been frequently or intensively used also for the presentation in serious context. For instance, this museum work on the left side, and vice versa. So please give me a hint if in case I'm too loud, too silent or whatever. So on the right side, another example is...
Sander, you can continue. Everything is okay.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay, on the right side, there's another example, and that means that also in games, in that case, Assassin's Creed, frequently some, I would say, exploring opportunities for exploring history, heritage within the gaming environments has been installed. So that's maybe another trend where the edutainment is, I would say, reaching from a game perspective. And finally, it's about the question how to using those settings without any digital device. So on the user side, so on the one hand, that's an example from my lab, so the holographic projections, of course, but otherwise in a larger setting, of course, those point clouds on the right side, so where, for instance, a cloud of those drones or multicopters are used to show the outlines and point clouds of also heritage sites which are no more extant. 3D printing in different versions has been also become a major point here for how to visualizing, how to making 3D content, 3D models perceptible. And of course, there are many different approaches how to realizing this, of course, besides printing or rapid prototyping approaches. Of course, there are several milling or also laser graving opportunities to realize that. Let's maybe switch to another point, and this is how to engage users in that process. And Of course, a big issue at the moment, or a big topic at the moment, is storytelling. So not only to make specific entities, objects accessible, but also to embed them in their cultural context and so on. By the way, that's an example from a colleague from Melbourne who virtualized historic Angkor Wat and the daily lives there. Citizen science is another big strand. So I think Wikidata has been already mentioned several times today. And of course, this crowd collections, but also this, I would say, approaches of crowd research are, of course, a big point also related to 3D. And one example here are, for instance, repositories for 3D content, where of course different producers are coming together and sharing and their also heritage related content. The biggest platform, by the way, announced in 2019 that they have over 200,000 objects tagged as cultural heritage at that time. I think there might be some more at the current state, at the current time. And let's come now to a final point in this SOTA or tour de force over the approaches. So what are data-related challenges? And in the current time with Web 3.0, I think Fabio Vitali already talked or had a great provided a great insight in that. Of course, it's always a question of how to linking data sources to each other and enriching data. In case of 3D, it's very much about how to linking the 3D model with underlying information sources. So for instance, images used for reconstruction or textual content and so on. And how to make this, of course, accessible for users in that case. And finally, it's also about the question how to enhancing collections in terms of producing, I would say, collections and museum works, for instance, in a user targeted way. So for instance, this example taken from British Museum, where a virtual museum work is created depending on the interest and specific settings of the museum users here. And finally, as I mentioned, of course, the connection between images, texts, and models in terms of classification, in terms of aligning, also in terms of data structures, that's I would say, a still ongoing large-scale research topic. Finally, long-term preservation, so what to do with this data, how to connect and maintain these data sets, just as a final task in this round here. Let me, in the next step, briefly introduce to an European endeavor, which is the Time Machine organization, which is having, I would say, in mind to deal with those topics, also from a 3D perspective. And maybe let me skip that, but start with a vision in that case. So what if mass digitization would be possible in a moment? Or if accessing documents, if having a semantic enrichment of all those data sets in a, I would say, easily to conceive and also easily to do way, and with high automation, of course. And of course, it's a question for how to make these data sets accessible, how to providing access to this kind of information in multiple ways. Of course, it's very much connected to the question how to process these different items, these different entities, and these different streams also of data and of information. And I think many of the, or you can imagine what I would say also large scope of topics of questions is related to this from a research perspective, for instance. The Time Machine in that case is an endeavor, a research initiative on big data technologies. It started from an H2020 flagship CSA and now turned into a research association. And the idea here is to have, or what has been developed within this that flagship CSA has been a 10 years research roadmap with specific focus to big data technologies for history and heritage and exploitation support. And at the moment, this the idea is, of course, or the endeavor of the time machine is, of course, to realize that at the one hand with regards to research, but also to services, infrastructures, for instance, with regards to access to funding, competency development, and so on. Time Machine as an organization is currently formed by 650 member institutions. So you see we have a good balance between academic research partners, private sector companies, but also GLAM institutions, and of course various civil societies. And let me come to a last point in my presentation today, and that would be just to provide about one example from about a building brick we are creating and we are working on in my lab, and that is automated 4D modeling from historical sources. So in our case, in Jena, it's the objective to visualize no more extant historical cityscapes and to do it in a highly automated way from historical photographs, also to include textual, oral information, and so on and so on. And the challenge here is that you may know about Street View, you may know about, of course, Google Earth and so on. The technical approaches used for those presentations are not working if dealing with historical material. And so for us, a big challenge here is, of course, how could we deal with historical content and, of course, sparse information, not fully accessible historical content, available content, and so on and so on. We are working on, since at the moment 7 years, is to have a pipeline which is able to retrieve this 3D, or let's rather say 4D, three geometric spatial dimensions plus one temporal dimension, to retrieve this 4D scaled models from, at the one hand, ground plots, but also projected textures. And important steps are here to use, of course, machine learning technologies, but also, I would say, visualization technologies to combine this to a 4D impression. And what is turning out, or what is an output here, is at the one hand to have those browser-based 4D environments, at the moment covering specific cityscapes, but also working at world scale currently, but also with a similar technology behind to have those browser interfaces. So that is some browser interface we are currently prototyping in the German Photothek, and providing access to images, providing access to also underlying information and statistical analysis, all are coming out of this automated pipeline. And what we are currently working on is, of course, to utilizing this kind of an ecosystem at the one hand with regards to having several data inputs. So for instance, we have recently integrated booking systems so that you could have a 4D impression from whatever place in the world, but also could book your restaurants and have touristic information, have access to the Wikipedia articles, and so on and so on. And also we introduced, or we are working currently on city tours and city works. So for instance, we are working with schools in order to enabling pupils to create virtual city tours for our kids worldwide in order to presenting about their history and their historical city. And I hope I'm more or less in time. So let me maybe end with this slide, of course, where, of course, also bigger players like Ubisoft are working on this topic, how to enable younger generations multiple types of users and so on in these, I would say, 3D blended environments where locations and virtual contents are getting more or less mixed. Thank you for your attention.
Sander, thank you very much for your clear presentation. We are looking forward to come to Jena and for a conference that we hope that you organize soon. And we have time for 3 minutes question. Any question from the audience or from the from home? Rosa is has one question. Rosa is there. The microphone is there next in front of my chair. Okay.
Thank you, Sander, for the very interesting presentation. You mentioned, do you hear me?
Sander, do you hear?
Do you hear me?
Yeah, I hear.
Okay. So you mentioned it briefly, but maybe I can ask to open it up a little bit more. You mentioned ownership at some point, or where you were speaking about 3D models. We have been working in several papers as well as a report for the European Union related to 3D printing and intellectual property rights. So you might know that there is a lot of challenges when you try to apply IPRs to 3D printing, different elements, especially the CAD file. We don't even know whether actually IP applies at all to the CAD files. So are these kind of challenges somehow, what's the role of these challenges in your work? Do you consider them at all, or do they have any role at all?
Many thanks for this question, Rosa. And I fully agree with you that this is at the one hand a highly important point. But secondly, also, I would say a little bit, I would say a fuzzy situation on that. So as you mentioned with 3D copyrights and 3D printing copyrights, of course, it's a question who owns a model. And of course, there are different legal, I would say, maybe aspects, you may know much more better than me, which are related to the original object, which are related, of course, to a possible copyright due to digitization, but it's very much also, of course, about the utilization and the data enrichment and so on and so on. Besides 3D printing, maybe if we are dealing with this topic of compiling these environments from different data sources, it adds, of course, also the question who has been the owner of the photograph or the taker of the photograph, and is there a copyright on this photograph, for instance? Or in the geometrical settings, is there any copyright on the geometrical setting? And is there, I would say, enough artistic content also in there to have such a virtual reproduction, I would say, renowned as a, I would say, a copyright restricted point here. So, of course, there are those different, I would say, maybe inputs related to possible legal right entities which are coming in here. Another point is, of course, the legal situation related to European law. So in Germany, for instance, we have the interesting situation that if you are reproducing a specific, I would say, product setting, there might be a copyright on this reproduced setting. But if you are not having a specific product, but taking the same efforts with, I would say, a historical situation and so on, there might be no copyright on that. Even if the work and maybe also the artistic intelligence behind may be the same and a very high one in both cases. So that's a specific German perspective. Of course, in other countries, it's different. It's definitely different. So from my view, I think we are still having a fuzzy situation here, and fully agree with you that it is I would say, something which is missing unification at the moment.
Thank you very much, Sander. Now we go on with Monica Palmirani presentation. Please, Monica, upload your slides.
I open my screen. It's okay for you? Okay.
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 But welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to intervene in this workshop, in this event. Thank you to Rosa. Thank you to everyone. My talk is about a very specific domain, so the legal cultural heritage contents. Not all the legal content obviously is classifiable in cultural heritage, and we have a great tradition, especially in the University of Bologna, to manage historical of law content. And so today I want to share with you some of my concern coming from my experience that I have been done in 20 years in this domain. First of all, I wanted to share with you the vision of the European Commission that is shaping a European data space of cultural heritage, especially based on Europeana. And there is a great moment for these kind of topics, cultural heritage in general, because as Sander said before, there is a great connection expectation from the European policies to create a new tourism linked with the cultural heritages, so to use this kind of a very specific European knowledge for pushing the economy of the tourism. You can see some figures taken from the official document of the European Commission. And you can see also a fragment of a communication very important that was emitted in November of the last year, where there are specifically some plan for Europeana. And you can see also the last meeting of the 1st March, where Europeana was definitely pointed out as a European data space for cultural heritage. I start from that because I have some consideration. We need to combine a different regulation according to that, not limited to this communication of European Commission, but also the forthcoming Data Government Act with a new aspect of contribution of so-called altruism data. So in order to collect another typology of data set that can be useful and can enrich a lot the current situation of the cultural heritage. We are waiting for the Data Act, maybe in 2 years, not very soon, but we have definitely also the Copyright Directive that permits some part of using of existing database, even if covered by copyright, because inside of a copyright directive, there is a possibility to use at least the first 6 articles in order to extract from copyrighted database important material for research without limitation. So we needed to pay attention for our next future research to this scenario in order to figure out how we can foster these regulation in favor of cultural heritage and our researches. One very important topic is concerning the license, and the last public sector information, so-called the PSI2 or second, push all the Europe to share a standard license. We know perfectly the situation is very fragmented according to the license concerning the license in Europe of open data, and also about cultural heritage open data. We have about 50 type of license. Some of them are local license, like French, Spain, Italian license for a specific local domain. These affect a lot the great expectation of Europe to build the common data space of cultural heritage. In this perspective, the European institution figure out and propose a very important approach that I reported in these slides, to use a Creative Commons attribution for 0, so-called CC BY, and only residually and only for limited type of data use CC0 public domain. Unfortunately, in this perspective, you can see that CC0 is recommended for raw data, and it's okay, in my opinion, but also for metadata. And this is creating the cultural heritage a great problem that we have already faced with the Ministry of Culture Heritage of Italy, and we have faced also in our projects. Because Europeana, if it's true that it is the future for our European data space, we need also to consider that the model of license and the policy of Europeana is to contribute the metadata at least with the license CC0 according with also the European institution recommendations. So the trend is to use a Creative Commons attribution for many content and or proprietary license in case and CC0 for metadata. But the question is, what is metadata in the legal cultural heritage, but in general? This is a main key point to understand. And let me say that Italian Ministry of Cultural Heritage not allowed by law to distribute even if catalogs metadata in CC0, because catalogs, bibliography, and also any kind of selection of material, I mentioned for instance, a very important selection by experts or a very specific domain in painting is covered by a specific copyright, so-called intellectual property right of the authors, and in this case also by the ministry. So there is a problem of conflicting between European recommendation, European policy, and some local domestic law that are protecting not limited the content but also the metadata as a peculiar part of the expert analysis and job. So you can see in these, the CC BY is the preeminent, but also we don't have so much public domain release content or metadata. On the other hand, we want definitely to produce a material ready for linked open data, not limited to datasets, but annotated with the RDF, and Fabio presented before the vision that we would like to implement. And these are great problems because also linked open data approach need job and intellectual effort, and time to time these transformation from simply dataset to linked open data imply to have a recognition of intellectual property right. So there is another problem that we want to tackle with the linked open data is the possibility to attribute at least the license attribution in a correct way. Nowadays, the CC BY and the license in general are very simple, just to put an icon and we can say, okay, you can use or reuse this content, but please respect the credits of the attribution. But the problem is what kind of attribution? So we have two questions now. What is a data set and data metadata? And what is the attribution? And in which way we can, in the semantic web, using linked open data, represent this kind of information in an appropriate way? Because if you are able to answer to these questions, we can disclose a huge amount of content in appropriate way, and everyone is very happy to do so and contribute to Europeana for growing the common data space of a cultural heritage. Without this technical solution, the attribution is very confused, inaccurate, and not correct under legal point of view. So suppose to have an accurate markup of the license, we can ask to the search engine or Europeana, give me all the content with metadata, that the metadata belong to University of Bologna, but the content belongs to another institution of museum. Nowadays, it's very difficult because this kind of metadata are very flat and not so much sophisticated to represent the appropriate rights, permissions of all the actors involved in this complex creation of the cultural heritage. So this is an example of a CC BY that is a very good model. So we have an icon. The icon is linked to the legal text, and in the back there is the RDF. But the RDF of CC BY Creative Commons is very simple respect to the complex situation that we have. Because nowadays, especially in the cultural heritage, we have a lot of mixed data sets. So how I can represent this situation? I take the images from one museum. I scan it with a specific effort and money, with specific scanning with a high level. And so the digital scanning belongs to University of Bologna, not so longer to the museum. And then another museum annotate, and another one put other metadata. So it's a so-called collective work in the intellectual property right definition. And we needed to define this composition in very accurate way. So suppose that I use 3 data sets, one from Alice, one from Dino and Fabio, all of them released with Creative Commons. Nowadays, also in Europeana, there is only CC BY license and the link of the text without any more information of these thread and the provenance of the other data set that compose the result of a mixed data set. We have also a common schema of metadata in the open data that are used also in the European level. And there is a specific element, license and rights, but it's very limited and not enough. And what we suggest is to enlarge using also provenance of Provo ontology, and to include also the provenance of the other data sets and the other license in order to attribute the correct chain of the life cycle of these data set at the hand that is a result of mixed data. And using the techniques presented by Fabio are very, very important for related each other the assertion in the correct way, because now the assertion of Creative Commons is flat and can say that the dataset result from the mixing is mine and no one can check the correctness of this assertion. And is a matter of not limited to attribution, but authoritative assertion in the semantic web, and to track the provenance and also the responsibility of these assertions. We tested these problems, not the solution, since now in 2 big projects, one called Irnerio and another one Mosaico. Irnerio was basically set up in the past between 2000 and 2010, and the second one is a continuation of the first. This Irnerio is a very famous project collection. We can collect. We have about 289 codes and 160,000 of images of manuscript of the law that was the foundation and the ground of the University of Bologna, the oldest one in the West land. And inside of these, we wanted to annotate not limited some metadata, but also you can see the stratification of the annotation. So inside you can see the the Codex, Justinian codes. Sorry. And in the second level, you have the cursio annotation. But the scholar and the pupil of a cursio, or the lawyer, after put another third level of annotation. And we have pages with 3, 4, 5 levels of annotations. And we wanted to track this kind of annotation of annotation, who said what and which moment historically, because it is evident that the Justinian Code, the Roman law, happened in some period of the history, and the accuracy annotation is dated in another period, and the annotation of that annotation again. So nowadays, there is no mature model in the Europeana for managing this kind of important information for the lawyers or the expert of law manuscript, and they're so relevant. So this is a situation is more complex. A part of these, we have the Codex. The Codex is composed by different works. So in the same Codex, it is a book. We can find different other works independently. And we have also bibliography connected with the work. Bibliography comes from scholars, from professors, from experts. And also we have author for bibliography and author for the work, and not limited, but we have also comments from experts around the world. And we have additional, like this is a signature of the author collected by different resources, why not in Wikipedia or in other resources, or external, like this museum or a collection. So as I said, Irnerio is one of the most important collection of law manuscript in the world, and there is also a little ontology for managing the topics, but not the ontology for the creation of the scenarios that I represented. Also because the metadata are not really metadata, is part of the expert comment as well. So one professor comment or a cursio comment is a content itself. So depending to the perspective of the scholar, the content and the metadata are managed in different perspective. So this is also the manuscript of Mosaico with a similar problems. So we have a book of a scholar today. So this is a book of a critical edition of this manuscript. And then there is the manuscript, and the manuscript is recorded with images, but inside of the images we have also other levels of annotations. And we can see. There is another problem. We need also to manage not limited the IPR and the related license and permission for improving reusability, and hopefully to include all this material in Europeana in the future. But we have also another problem of watermarking. The scanning manuscript time to time requires to put a watermarking of the provenance, and we need to have additional metadata for tracking the transformation for the material, physical material media to the digital media. And because of this is managed by watermarking, we need a special metadata for tracking these, and not limited to put inside of the picture like in this example. So what are our interests and what we are working? We are working for transforming all these material using Accomantoso and TI time to time, or Enrich, that is a special extension of a TI for manuscript. We use linked open data. We have a PhD students that are transforming everything of these databases in linked open data. And we wanted to annotate with the appropriate metadata of a license for tracking all the history of the license, not only last level like today, but all the history of the license and also the provenance, who used what in which moment and so far. And definitely, theoretically speaking, we wanted to provide at the end also methodology for contributing in appropriate way to Europeana with this more sophisticated model, very useful for the lawyer over the world and also for the cultural heritage representation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Monica, for your presentation. I think that we don't have really much time for questions because we are running out of time. But if the audience has some question, please raise quickly your hand, or you can put the question on in the chat, and then Monica can answer to that. Okay? So thank you very much, Monica. And now the floor is for Rosa Ballardini, and I just would like to remind you that we have the concluding remarks that Melanie Sarantou from the University of Lapland will do at the end of this session. So, Rosa, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dino. Am I sharing with the others already? Do you see the slides online? No. No. Okay, great. So I'm the last of the day, and I see that you're all experiencing a very well-known principle in intellectual property law, namely the principle of exhaustion. So I'll try to be quite quick and really point out some key points that I wanted to present to you today. So I'm taking, in a way, a little bit in another direction, or at least adding a layer to what has been discussed so far, and the layer relates to ethics. So the presentation that or the few talks that I would like to share with you is based on works that we have been doing with different scholars. One being Iris Kestila, who is sitting here in the audience. Iris, say hi. And then we have been working also with other scholars around this topic related to the role of intellectual property rights, if there is a role of intellectual property rights, in the context of indigenous cultural heritage. And then we add to that the digitalization aspect. So this indigenous cultural heritage is what adds actually a layer of ethical that created some clashes when we try to address the problem or the issue from the point of view of Westerner type of intellectual property rights. So that's kind of what my talk is going to be about. I think we all know, at least here in Lapland, that's quite well discussed, the fact that indigenous cultural heritage has increasingly become important, in particular issues related to protection of it, access of it, management of the rights related to indigenous cultural heritage. The reasons why this topic has become so, in a way, mainstream, there are different reasons, but at least we can mention a couple of them. One, the awareness regarding the rights of indigenous people in general and to their culture especially. And the second, the fact that technological development has been presented by several speakers before me, has radically actually increased the accessibility and shareability and distributability of this heritage. Of course, we have, I think, here heard during the morning several presentations presenting very nice and maybe a positive picture of digitalization in the context of cultural heritage. Especially, I think the presentation by Sander was very positive. However, let's not forget that digitalization also question certain elements and ask us to take a step back and think very well both about digital and about post-colonialism. And this applies very much in the context of indigenous cultural heritage. So the key point here is that beyond efficiency, beyond the fact that we are able to use these technologies really to improve access of these cultural heritage elements, artifacts, and places, how can we create and design a proper legal system that supports accessibility, protectability, and at the same time also respects the cultural sensitivities that are by definition part of a culture of the owners of the culture, so to say. So why am I speaking about intellectual property rights? I'm sure most of you have heard that IPRs have been considered since from the start a very nice tool to protect cultural heritage in general. However, when we speak about indigenous cultural heritage and intellectual property rights, there is a very troublesome relationship since from the start. And this troublesome relationship is partly due to the structure of the intellectual property system. So partly is a technocratic issue. So it's the way that intellectual property rights are created that it's a little bit problematic. But it's not only about that. It's also an issue of the way we want to justify intellectual property rights under the current system. So, for example, some of the so-called, what I said, technocratic issues, if we take intellectual property rights, they are individual rights, private individual rights. While rights to cultural heritage, when we speak about indigenous cultural heritage, very often they are collective rights. So they're rights owned by a community, not by an individual person. Again, when we speak about intellectual property rights, we refer to all the features of private property. While again, this is not exactly the same perspective that is reflected in cultural heritage of indigenous people when they speak mostly about collective property. So for the property lawyers in the audience, we have different type of properties in our legal system. IPRs is based on this private property type. Then there are other issues related more specifically, for instance, to the way copyright is designed. There are also issues related to patents. If we speak about broadly, not cultural heritage, not only about like artistic elements, but also maybe including traditional knowledge. So we expand a little bit also to technical stuff. So there are several issues, and I won't mention them all, but keep in mind that this starting point, so IPR seems like a nice way to protect cultural heritage in general, but at the same time, when we speak about indigenous cultural heritage, it doesn't work very well. So that's already not a good starting point. And then I said that in addition to these technical issues, there are some another layer, and this other layer relates to the way that we currently justify the intellectual property system. There are different theories for justifying why and how a monopoly right on a certain thing should be balanced with the access of that artifact. The current situation, at least in Western European countries, I would say also in the United States clearly, but in most, I would say, legal system of intellectual property rights, we have decided that there is much more emphasis on the economic efficiency of the IPRs as opposed to emphasis on societal values. So at the end of the day, the IP system is a very nice system. It's there to provide the right incentives to those who are able to create so that they come up with new creation and innovation in the markets, and ultimately we all benefit. But the whole idea of the IP system, it should be balanced with access. It should be balanced with several societal purposes and values. At the moment, the balance is not very balanced. It's a bit like that. And this is very problematic when we speak about indigenous cultural heritage. So there are different perspectives to this, but I would say that perhaps according to our findings, at the heart of the problem is how can we really balance and put together economic efficiency in IP and IPRs in general, and balancing with the ethics, especially the ethics that is at the basis of indigenous people's values. Is this possible? How can we do that? How can we reach that balance? How can we strike that balance? There are ways. Before going to the ways, I hope I have some time to show you a couple of, actually only 2 examples, key examples from Sami indigenous people, where we really see that this marriage between IP and indigenous cultural heritage is problematic. The first example is this one that Iris kindly provided from her project that is currently ongoing, and the project is called Digital Access to Sami Heritage Archives. So this is an example of a picture of Sami people that is displayed in the service of this digital access to Sami archive repository. And in here you can find some of the challenges with IPRs. So first of all, one challenge is that the repository relies on CC licenses. Clearly, CC licenses, at least in this kind of example, different organizations can also use different licensing schemes. But even if we stick to the CC license, commercial use is not necessarily explicitly denied. And this commercial use might not necessarily, actually, in most of the cases, do not find a good it's not very welcome in the context of indigenous, from the perspective of indigenous communities. Another example is that, for example, the rights to the photographs often belongs to non-Sami people. They belong to maybe people in the archives, they belong to organizations, they don't belong to Sami people. And that's another problem. It relates to history, it relates to the way that these pictures and materials were collected, but the point is that that's problematic. And then there are perhaps also other issues that are not necessarily so related to IPRs, but at least these couple of issues are a little bit problematic. Then we go to this case that probably most of you have heard about it, the Frozen case. What happened is that Frozen, both 1 and 2, are strongly based on Sami cultural heritage. If you look at the sequence, you find a lot of inspiration by Disney from Sami culture. Actually, Disney have paid a lot of visits in Lapland while shooting and try to create the Frozen movie. About, for example, the figure in Kristoff, the way he's dressed is Sami, at least it has several elements of Sami culture, and also the fact perhaps his traditional way of living from reindeer herding is clearly elements taken from Sami culture. So this, in Frozen 1, was not much discussed, so to say, in a sense that Disney did not at all engage with the Sami community, but obviously this over here this started people started to discuss about it and were not exactly happy of what was going on. And I think the problem is very well explained in this quote that was published in Helsinki Sanomat. And according to this quote, if I read it, the question is what Frozen is, why Frozen is problematic is because first of all, it does not acknowledge at all the culture of Sami. Second, nothing is returned to the community. So in Frozen 2, actually, Disney started to realize the problem in a way or the other, and they engaged with the Sami community. And they started a dialogue. And at the end of the day, they reached a compromise where actually elements of Sami cultural heritage were in a way recognized, and also things were given back to the community. Giving back, I'm not saying necessarily only in economic terms, but for instance, translating the sequence in Sami language, for example. So based on these examples, the question is, can we actually do something to for this marriage to actually proceed, to continue maybe in a more peaceful way? And maybe what can be learned from the Frozen context is that the issue of informed consent, which is a very well-known principle, at least in several areas of law, could perhaps be applied also in this context. We learned that there is the need to involve, so inclusiveness of the community is necessary. And we also need that there is the need to return results to the community in a way or the other. So how can we reach this through intellectual property rights without completely distorting the purpose of IPRs? There are different ways, and in our papers we have considered different possibilities. We have, for instance, checked whether the law can be somehow changed. And we have done a couple of papers about that. But what I'm focusing here in this conclusion is not how to change the law. That's an option, but it's not the focus of today. Another option is to develop some ethical guidelines. And that's the option that is currently developed in the context of the project that IRIS is ongoing. The reason of developing ethical guidelines is because we know, at least as lawyers, how long it takes to change a law. It takes ages and it's really bureaucratic. It's local, so it's geographical based, it's not global. So there are challenges. I'm not saying we should forget about that option. I'm saying that in the meantime, perhaps you could also use some soft measures. These ethical guidelines were developed, as far as I understand, together with the communities. So there was really an inclusive process with the Sami communities with different reiteration. They have been tested with the community, and they have been basically included as part of the portal. And then maybe Iris can explain a little bit better if there are questions in the Q&A session. But the point here, without going into much detail, the point here is that there are ways for IPRs and our systems to become more inclusive, and to raise the ethical layer in this discourse. So there are ways, but we also need to acknowledge that we need to use those ways. We know that the ethical guidelines are not binding, so they are not like laws, but it's also perhaps an issue of education and increasing awareness about this issue. So I think I'm totally running out of time, so I just thank you very much. Here are some references for those who are interested, and also some thank you to all of you in English, Finnish, and also some Nordic Sami languages.
Thank you very much, Rosa. And now we have 5 minutes for questions from the audience. Yes, there is one question from, I did something, wait. I did something maybe wrong. No, I haven't closed it. I hope so. Click here and, okay, so Melanie is already online. Thank you, Melanie. Some minutes for the question. Okay.
It's not a question, it's rather a statement from a man who is watching Frozen every night and day. And the first very basic statement here is that I'm not an expert of Sami culture, although I am a regular visitor to Finland, and I know more than every child here is about this, but when people see Frozen, they know what Frozen is about. It's very important, especially in the second episode. But and what I say here is not the question again. Is not to defend Disney at all, but we all know that Disney strategies at least partially conquering new markets to involving expressions from local communities, expressions in a broader sense. So think of Mulan as well. It's another story, totally transforming into American thinking. And again, not supporting Disney here with this, but isn't it also beneficial for Sami culture that they are shown? Actually, again, I watched the cartoons. I don't say that Frozen is against Sami people in general, so it can be probably beneficial for them as well. But this is just a question here. What do you think about this?
So I'm not Sami myself, obviously, I'm from Italy, but my understanding is that there are a lot of things inside the culture of Sami, for example, or indigenous people, that unless you are into and completely understand that culture, you might take something and use it in a completely different context and distort the purpose of that image. So that's why there is the need to discuss with the communities. So certain things in the indigenous cultures mean certain things. So you cannot just take, I don't know, a piece of cloth and put it in a figurine without having any idea what that piece of cloth might mean for the community.
So, and then the question, are they beneficial or not? I give you maybe an example of what could, by absurd, happen. Disney, by absurd, so by law, the law could allow Disney to, for instance, trademark some of the figurines that include Sami dress. And by absurd, they could forbid Sami people to use those trademarked elements of the dress. So that's why the ethical layer is kind of important to be included. I'm not saying about beneficial or not beneficial. I'm just saying that there is a need to discuss.
Dorit?
Yes, thank you. I'm not going into the ethical questions, of course, but on the basis of what you've said exactly, and do you think that for indigenous communities, and the question of what is indigenous is something that I just called on, also on the basis of treating their intellectual property rights, should have a different section, for example, on a Europeana platform, which is different from the Europeana today, or do you think it can be, let's say, a whole Europeana, but that to certain digital objects or whatever will be, let's say, there will be other intellectual property rights. How do you see that exactly in the future?
Do you want to answer, Iris? So that at least we do this together.
So if I understood the question correctly, so should there be like a separate somehow section or such or?
Because of intellectual property rights, yes.
Yeah, from the point of intellectual property rights, I don't see that there should be separate section, but this is something that I don't think necessarily me or Rosa are actually like good persons to answer, because this is probably something that should be negotiated with the Sami communities, like how should the cultural heritage be represented in service. And
so you think there is a community? I mean, what I mean is this. The question is this: either we treat even indigenous whatever that each and every intellectual property right is about a digital object, or we are treating a whole community, okay? So we are treating the whole digital object. For example, you gave something which is very, it struck me, there was a photography that was done by a creator, which is a photographer, which probably was not a Sami, okay? And you say, okay, this does not, the Sami are not there, it does not belong to Sami. Of course it does not, because it was the photographer who passed there and did the Sami. So the principle of creator exists, and so it has nothing to do with Sami. But what I'm saying is this: either you are claiming that indigenous communities should have other intellectual property rights, ethically speaking, so we should treat them not as specific digital objects, but as indigenous digital objects of community, which have their property rights and which needs a section. And it's not about the Samis, whatever indigenous communities, or you think that each and every digital object, whatever, Sami, Venetian, whatever, should be in Europeana, but each and every digital object would have the intellectual property rights. That's, I think, the problem is. Because she said, what I'm saying, yours, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, that it's between the Sami community and, let's say, Europeana. The photo that we saw does not belong to Sami. How do we put it there? Is it indigenous or not indigenous?
yeah, if I may.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I think you are like in the core of this problem pretty much. like that's like precisely the issue here, that there are, like, we can ethically say that Sami are the owners of this, but they are not legally so, and thus the ethical guidelines, for example. So we perhaps need this more flexible, like soft law type of instruments, because as Rosa mentioned, like changing law is very, very stiff and lengthy process. And like perhaps for us lawyers, for example, it easily we think in terms of law, like what is legal, what is not. But here we perhaps need to broaden our perspective and think what is ethically correct and who we need to involve. And those people are not necessarily, there's no legal obligation to hear them, but we should hear them nevertheless. And like think this more about as a, not only as a legal problem, but also as a social and cultural, societal problem as well. And also as a problem of, like, for example, in terms of Finland, like history of colonialism. So we need to take all these aspects into consideration when we think about how to solve these issues.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Iris, but as usual, the most interesting question comes at the end of the seminar, but this is the reason why we, for sure, me, Rosa, and Iris will organize another seminar about digital cultural heritage. And so, and I would like to thank both of them, Iris and Rosa, for this seminar that we have organized together. But please, Melanie, the floor is yours. And sorry because we are delayed.
That's fine. I hope you can hear me well. I'll have to keep my summary really short since we are already at the end of the seminar. Thank you, everyone. It's been incredibly rich and really stimulating seminar to listen to. So really, we have touched upon the question of what the positive sides are to digitalizing cultural heritage, but we also looked at the concerns. And for example, I think Rosa in the end posed an interesting question, how this area can, for example, be decolonized. But I think it's also an area that Monica stepped on. How can it better be organized, and how can it structurally become more suitable for everyone to have better access, and so that the metadata can be used. But certainly the complexity in the field of data archiving was highlighted. For example, the findability of data can become incredibly painful. A lot of data is unreliable, incomplete, and it offers simply a new complex labyrinth of what we are presented with. And therefore data archiving can also be restrictive, and it can set up boundaries. And most of all, present us with uncertainties and vacuums. But there were also a lot of positive sides that were highlighted. For example, Professor Reines illustrated the complexities related to the originality of data, but she was also looking at how secure data archiving can actually be done, and if solutions for those can be found. Professor Vitali also discussed the complexities of the conversion from physical to digital worlds, and gave us an excellent example of how Wikidata and Wikipedia can actually create uncertainties and vacuums and gaps in data systems. And then Professor Metzi, I'm probably not saying it very well, gave a really interesting look on how the arts, how artifacts can actually benefit from NFTs, really unpack the complexities around those. And then Professor Münster also looked at challenges related to 3D modeling, and looked at questions around impact of ownership, authorship of virtual immersion, digital tours, mixed realities, and even I think the experiences, the positive experiences that that need to be considered, for example, stepping into the metaverse. Professor Monica Palmirani, she sketched the current situation of progress in data regulation and licensing. I found that very insightful, how she highlighted the situation of licensing and how attribution and kind of building more appropriate data spaces and cultural heritage should be considered. And finally, Professor Rosa Ballardini and Iris discussed the really complex issue around IPRs and ethical considerations when it comes to digitalizing Indigenous cultural heritage. So that was hopefully a short oversight, and thank you again, everyone, for bringing this really relevant conference together. And I think, Rosa, there was already a question that this should be done once more. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Melanie, for the conclusion. And sorry again, because we are late, some minutes late. Thank you very much to everybody, for the presenters, and to you, Hannah, that has helped today, for also the technical problems. And the slides will be online, and also the recording of the seminar will be soon online in our website, in the LTD research group website of the University of Lapland. One thing from Iris.
I'm sorry, just a quick correction about the project. So digital access to summits archive was actually recently ended. So that was like a quick correction to what was said.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much again, and have a nice afternoon.